Welcome to Sykes Peak, the podcast that's going to change the world one person at a time. Welcome to our podcast, Sykes Peak. Today we're dealing with the issues that surround trauma. I'm Dr. Keith Roach.
I'm Sean Van.
And we're here to be a part of Sykes Peak, the place where we are changing lives one person, changing the world one person at a time. We welcome you today. And today we're talking about trauma. And I'm going to let Sean start off with kind of a definition of what trauma is. When we talk about trauma, there's a lot of things that pop up in people's minds about what that might be and what that looks like. But I'm going to let Sean give you an idea of what that looks like in a definition. So, Sean, what do you see trauma to be?
Sure. So I think when most people think of trauma, excuse me, still waking up. There's, I think there's some different types and some different methods that can cause the development of what we refer to as trauma in the brain and how it functions. And so there are sometimes physical conditions. My brother has a friend with a traumatic brain injury, for instance, where that physical injury causes a functioning in the brain that works the same as emotional disturbances that can also sometimes occur. So there's physical, there's emotional, and there's also sometimes a singular event, like a car accident. The enormous amount of trauma that the U.S. felt after 9/11, for instance, would be a singular event that caused a tremendous amount of trauma versus sustained, ongoing conditions like just being in a war zone for an extended period of time, or in a home as a child where your parents are fighting all the time. Those sustained long-term environments can also cause the brain to develop trauma. Now,
so being in an abusive situation,
yes,
is basically like being in a war zone.
Yes,
well,
absolutely.
Being in a war zone, what if you never pull the trigger? I mean,
same. Essentially, I think one of the best ways to think about trauma is that your mind, your brain, chemically, your body physically is in a constant state of alertness. And you're always looking and paying attention to the environment and surroundings because there may be a threat in the area, right? So if you're in a war zone, you're always looking for the enemy. And if you're in an abusive home, you're always looking for those subtle cues of when the next fight is going to break out or the next moment of abuse is going to occur.
So that would follow along the lines, you would change your behavior,
yes,
to keep from triggering.
Right. You would want to reduce the threat. And so you would, your body has these mechanisms and systems that work in tandem. This is a little nerd speak, but the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Okay. So a good way to think about it might be like the gas pedal, the brake pedal. Right. And that the sympathetic is the gas pedal. It amps you up and makes you go. So when there's a situation that needs attending to, you are hitting the gas pedal. And then when you are done with that situation and you've made it past the intersection safely, you hit the brake and slow down. And so you imagine that you're getting a yellow light and you're like, oh no, there's a sign, a signal going on in the environment. I need to hit the accelerator, and I go a little faster and I get through the environment and then I hit the brake and I slow down. So
is that what you do, going through a yellow light?
Usually, yeah. Got that from my grandmother.
Yeah.
My grandfather would slam on the brakes and stop, like
everybody ends up in the front seat.
Everyone's in the front seat after that. But my grandmother would just floor it. She was ready. I think the best way to think about this physically is holding your breath. When there is a situation that is stressful for you, you have that moment of panic or anxiety, you hold your breath, and you may not notice it, but you just have that moment where you like you think about something jumps out at you, you inhale It's that sympathetic nervous system trying to draw in oxygen just to get you ready to fight or flight if you need to. And so that inhale is the sympathetic nervous system. That's that gas pedal. But then the parasympathetic is that exhale, that relief, right? And so when therapists are often working with people who have trauma, stress, anxiety, we work with breathing techniques, and that's that activation of that parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, training the brain that don't stay in one state or the other, go back and forth, develop in, out. Let the brain understand, hey, this is what you're supposed to do here. Don't stay in one state of mind all the time. So I think that's probably a good overview for trauma.
For trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of questions that pop up in that. And I'm sure our listeners are thinking, well, I really didn't grow up in trauma, but I had a couple of incidents, and then there might be some out there that are saying, man, I grew up in a war zone.
Yeah.
So what would be some of the responses or reactions that you would have if you grew up as a child, say in an abusive situation? What would be some of the responses that you would have behaviorally, as an adult?
So many. I mean, I would say a lot of it. One of the big ones is going to be anger. You're going to see that a lot. You're going to see a lot of outbursts. You're going to see a lot of overreactions.
Overreaction, yeah.
That would probably be a good one. You can see some substance use. You can see some trying to find relief.
It's not necessarily a physically abusive situation.
No,
I mean, it could be an emotionally abusive situation where, as a child, as a teenager, you're asking questions about yourself and who am I? And, you're going through all those discovery moments in your life, and you have a parent that does not, that's not attuned to those questions that you have, and they continue with a put down or a put off, or that's not important, or you're not important, or, those kinds of responses.
Well, I imagine too, a lot of kids, like maybe you clean the house and you're ready for mom to get home, and you already cleaned the house so she can spend time with you, and she comes home from her shift and she's exhausted and she's like, just leave me alone. Like, that not recognizing your efforts and that sort of dismissal, like,
well, she might have been thinking all day long, house is a mess, and she gets home and she goes, this house is a wreck.
Yeah, she's still looking for the problems, right? She's still looking at the issue.
She still sees the problem, even though it may have been.
Like when you tell someone, don't think of pink elephant, then they start thinking of a pink elephant. It's like if you've been thinking about your dirty house all day, when you get home, you're not going to see the work and the effort that the kid did. You're going to see what's still lacking and what you have to do next. And you're like, I just got done with work. I don't want to do any more. And yeah.
So then what are some of the things that would arise in an adult response to trauma?
Again, I think there's a lot of different symptoms, but often it gets kind of complicated on the types of trauma, perhaps. Like, so for instance, with PTSD or a traumatic brain injury, there might be more anger and aggression. Where if you're in abuse, you might have poor relationships. You might seek extra validation or comfort in substance use or in obsessive behaviors, over cleaning, wanting to overly control situations. There's a lot of manifestations. They're not all harmful. They're not all like the most terrible ones, like violence or substance use. It could just be that you feel like you have to have a perfectly clean car. You can't have a hair out of place on your head. It could just be that need to be perfect and control every situation.
And that's not obsessive compulsive disorder.
No.
That's just
different.
This drive within you that says
to keep safe.
It's got to be this way.
Stay safe.
I have to have control of this situation. If I don't have control, then I'm going back into the mess.
Something bad will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that if I don't have my house perfectly clean and someone comes over, they'll be disappointed in me. And it
Right.
takes you back to those childhood feelings of, I was a disappointment to my mother. I don't want to experience that again.
Well,
It's basically going back to that war zone.
my job as a child, my chore
Yeah.
was dusting.
Oh,
And as an adult today, I mean, I live just on the edge of 14 acres
Mhm.
that are constantly being farmed. And so in dry times, the dust is in the air all the time. And I'll wipe stuff down, throughout the house.
oh yeah.
And my wife, God love her, doesn't think about dusting,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and but I do,
Yes.
and so, I don't say, well, you should too.
Right.
I say, let me do it.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah, yeah.
take care of this. I
Yeah.
mean, because I consider myself an expert at dusting because I've done it for,
Imagine so.
60 years,
Yeah.
So anyway,
If you think dust was bad there, you should try the Middle East.
yeah. Oh gosh, I can't even imagine.
It just-
Or live at the beach. I mean,
so much
sand
everywhere. Right.
So,
yeah.
but so we're not talking about obsessive compulsive
No,
disorder.
no.
We're just talking about this urge or this
right.
desire to keep things in order or keep things clean.
hmm
But see, now I do that just because I like orderly,
Sure.
happenings,
Orderliness, yeah, yeah.
orderliness,
Yeah.
and not because I'm a neat freak or anything, because I'm not that at all.
Sure.
But I like keep my car clean,
Right. Yeah.
Quick story. You ready?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a hot car in college, and it was one that was my dream car from the time I was like 12 until I got into college, and then I got the car.
Yeah.
It was a 240Z, Datsun 240Z, and it was before Nissan,
Uh-huh.
at least in America. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I have this 240Z, and I mean, it was diamond tuck interior,
Wow.
leather seats. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
it was sharp, the black carpet and all that kind of stuff. And I kept it. And, this is back in the day. They
Have to,
they
yeah.
didn't have the little hand vacs and
Oh,
stuff
no.
like that. You
Mm.
had to get the the Kirby vacuum cleaner out to vacuum the car out. And I loved it, and it was a hot car. I mean, it would fly. I mean, it just, if it had wings, it would go off the ground.
Oh, sure.
But I was my first date with my wife.
Yeah.
And I mean, she wasn't my girlfriend yet.
Yeah.
No, it was not the first date. It was the first trip to take her to my home. To meet my mom and dad, because I realized she's the one.
Right.
I mean,
right.
I stopped looking after that, and we get in the car and I said, do you want to stop at McDonald's and get something to eat on the way home? Yeah. Yeah. First thing she does is pull the French fries out of the bag upside down, and they just go all in between the seats. And she just looks at me and she goes, I'm sorry. And I go, just get them up. Just pick them all up, and I was digging French fries out of my car for about 2 years before I sold it, but anyway, the point is that I didn't like to have, and the funny thing is those French fries were still good. I mean, 2 years later, I mean, they didn't, deteriorate, or I didn't have mice or anything like that, but they were a little salty, but they were okay. The whole point is that, in my car, I like to have a clean car.
How'd you feel when your car wasn't clean, though?
Like I needed to get it done. It didn't make me feel bad or feel anything like that, because I don't.
Not out of your self-worth. No.
Yeah, it didn't, because it wasn't a traumatic. It wasn't part of a trauma that I experienced in my life. It was just a responsibility that I knew I had. So,
do you think that's just short, quick, almost yes or no? Maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that because of how you took care of your car, that your now wife saw that and understood your ability to take care of things?
I believe so, because she'll start a project
Yeah.
And then I'm the finisher,
Yeah.
because she knows that I'll take
Yeah.
it to to the point
Sure.
of, perfection or looking good or
I just
whatever.
think it's interesting sometimes, like those, sometimes we don't recognize that the things that we do in our behaviors can be the things that attract or detract people from us, and that, caring for things can be
The
a
only
good
problem,
indicator.
when she starts it
Yeah.
and I finish it, I become her employee.
Yeah, right.
That's the problem.
She's the boss,
So anyway, so what do we do? I mean, we've had a traumatic event in our life. No, not. We use the word traumatic or we use the word trauma, and it doesn't necessarily. I mean, that word sends a message. When we
Yes.
hear it, we think something bad has happened.
Right. No.
And it's not necessarily something bad that has happened to us.
Right.
And it could be that we just had overbearing parents, or we had a domineering parent,
Mhm. Mhm.
and one that was submissive.
Yes.
So you have a domineering and submissive parent,
Mhm.
and if they don't know how to balance that out,
Yes.
um,
Key. Very key.
it can
Balance.
be traumatic for the child.
Yes.
So for kids, let's talk about kids for a bit.
Well, I do want to say this too. Trauma is a wiring of your brain. It's a programming of how you operate as a person. It isn't, like you said, it isn't a breaking. It isn't that something in your brain has now destroyed. It's that your wires are attached to different places for a purpose of protecting you and of trying to keep you safe. And that's an important way of thinking about that.
So is it like death by 1,000 cuts?
It can be. It can be.
Because it's just a little bit. It's not a gouge.
Right.
It's just a little bit of scrape at a time,
Yes.
taking off a layer here and
Yep.
a layer here and a layer here, to the point that you get to where you're raw.
Yes.
And so your response mechanism is
Defense.
a raw response, and you become defensive.
Yep.
I mean, and this is in a conversation, and I see this in a lot of situations, a lot of conversations that I've had where I'll make a statement, and it's almost an immediate
Yes.
defensiveness
Yes. Yes.
to somebody, and it'll just be a general.
Yep.
It could just be a general fact that I'm stating.
Yep.
And the person that hears it goes, well, maybe not all the time.
Yes. So one of the things I think, again, there's physical and there's emotional, and there's like a strong and then like a sustained ongoing. So let's say you had a limb surgically removed. It's a physical trauma. Your body might still respond in traumatic responses from that. Like that might have a physical effect. But if you also had a strong emotional single event, sudden death of a loved one, might also, I mean, there's going to be grief and obviously, and there's mourning and the loss, but then there's that sustained ongoing that, like you said, death of 1,000 cuts, that constant verbal put down. Those are the ways I think of thinking about how the brain develops this defense mechanism and how we would think of trauma, right? So I think that's
well,
ballparking it.
Yeah, and trauma is going to be it's going to continue to be an issue in our lives until we learn how to disconnect those things that we've learned.
Yep. So
we have to unlearn what
Yes.
takes place.
And the good news is that can be done. The wiring can be rewired. And again, that your brain is always in that sympathetic mode. It's always in that moment, and you're just holding your breath. And if you hold your breath for too long, not good news, right? You flex that muscle indefinitely, eventually pain. So you have to relax the muscle and you have to exhale. Thank you for joining us today and listening in to Sykes Peak as we continue our series and talking about stress, anxiety, and trauma. We hope that you have gained some value in listening to us today and will join us again in the future.